Welcome to the Creative Condition Podcast, the show where I, Ben Talon, illustrator and writer, invite people from the creative industry and far beyond to share their story of creativity. Both the nature and the nurture, the chaos and the calm. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, something I'm increasingly fascinated by and so often misunderstood. So little by little, I hope to build an archive of fascinating stories, experiences and tips to help you maximise yours. The show is supported by Illustration X. Go and take a look at their incredible global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, go and listen to Dirty Freud over on Spotify and all good music platforms now. Today I'm joined by Kieron Lewis, South London-born graphic designer, public speaker and Adobe Live host. Kieron got in touch a number of years ago at the advent of his collaboration with Olga as one half of Olga Kay, and I wanted to speak to him ever since, but it's taken this long for the opportunity to come around. But here we are. These things operate just like creativity on their own timeline, and Kieron's got a lot to discuss about meaningful work, including his wonderful design for Still Breathing, 100 Black Voices on Racism, a tremendous book by HarperCollins. We're getting into all that and more. Hello and welcome to the Creative Condition Podcast. I am Ben Talon, I am back. I am loving the momentum of this show at the moment, and I hope that you guys have just a modicum of that because it keeps me going. Big thank you to the support of the show before we go any further as ever. Illustration X, incredible illustration and animation agency based in London, spread around the world, representing a great number of illustrators, animators, motion graphics specialists, live illustrators, event illustrators, you name it, they've got it, and you can see it all now on their portfolios at illustrationx.com. How are you doing, guys? I hope you're well. I hope you're enjoying the sunshine. We've had a run of it here in the UK, and it's not yet reached those terrifying and uncomfortable levels of last summer. I hope we don't get there, but I have a horrible feeling we're gonna. But we just have to keep in the shade, don't we, and make the best of it. I hope you're good. I keep saying that, and I mean it. So I mentioned at the top of the show I wanted to talk to Kieron Lewis, and I thought he might knock me back because Kieron got in touch a few years ago, and we were both very keen to have a conversation, and it was early days in his collaboration with Olga Kay, which we're going to get into. And it's not that I didn't want to do it, I absolutely did, because the work they were doing was tremendous and it chimed with me on so many levels, and any long-term listeners of the show will know fine well that I'm very passionate about the power of design and about activism in all its forms, and from the subtle right through to the hard-hitting necessary stuff. So it really did get me going, but I think it timed when I wasn't feeling overly enthused about the show. So again, long-term listeners will know that I've gone on little breaks here and there, and I'm a big believer in putting things down when the time is right and picking them back up, and not necessarily walking away and going, I'm done, it's over, which of course there are things when it's time and it's good to do that, but in this instance with a long format, long-term show like this podcast, 7 years now, there are invariably going to be times when you have to listen to those feelings and you don't have the same zest that you once had. And maybe that means you need to repackage it, repurpose it, change the format, change the duration, the frequency. There are so many things with running a project like this. And I produce everything myself. This is all done by me, and I know a lot of podcasters outsource the production and the music beds, and I don't create the music beds. That's done by Dirty Freud, long-term collaborator and good friend of mine. But there have been times when I have gone too hard at this thing and I've been juggling too much and something else needed my focus, be that parenthood, be that illustration work, be that other forms of my creativity. And I remember it falling at a time when it was on the wane and I really wanted to do it, but I was just running out of steam and I needed to walk away. And I did so at a time that meant that I missed the boat with Olga Kay. So I kept an eye on Kieron's work ever since, and we didn't really talk much in between. But when I saw him out there doing the promotional rounds, talking about this new book, Still Breathing, 100 Black Voices on Racism, again, it just hit the same notes that Olga Kay did, because it's powerful, important work that showcases, just how effective visual communication and storytelling can be when it comes to the big issues that we all face in the world today. So I absolutely had to find out what was going on and talk to Kieron, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to get into his background. We're finally going to get into Olga Kay like I always wanted to. And we're going to get into this book in all its forms and talk about this beautiful project, because it's, it's very, very powerful stuff. I'm very aware of my privilege as a white guy who is able to live in a nice area. I'm able to pay my bills. I haven't grown up suffering any kind of prejudice. Truthfully, I might have had someone shout ginger at me a couple of times in the street, or take the piss because I'm a Leeds United fan, but I don't consider those things to be the same gravity as racial abuse. Let's just say it, racial abuse, because that's what this book is about. It's very raw. I read it and I felt very moved by every story in the book, and there's a great range of approaches to these stories. And it's not something that has come into my world in a way that I have been touched by directly. I was going to say personally, that's not true. I have close friends who are of colour. I have friends from all over the world. I have many people in my world who have suffered prejudice in some way, shape or form. All of it wrong. Different levels of it. Depends on your standpoint. It's not a conversation I particularly want to get into because it's all valid. It's all, the people who are touched by this will they're the only ones who can truly tell you. And that's what this book does. So the brief, so let's get the blurb from Kieron's website. So Still Breathing, 100 Black Voices on Racism, 100 Ways to Change the Narrative is a collaboration between HarperCollins, Harper Inspire and The Eye. The publication was edited by actresses Suzanne Packer and Suzette Llewellyn. The publication focuses on 100 black voices from across the British community. Everyone featured has a voice, their lived experience, to help us set up a true conversation about racism in Britain. Those featured includes Beverly Knight, David Lammy, Kwame Amar and Bishop Rose Hudson Wilkin. From the cover to the interior, Kieron designed the entire 300-page hardback publication. In terms of the design process, he was keen to make each feature bespoke through the editorial design process. This involved a typographic approach which highlighted important aspects within the copy. I found that incredibly powerful, as we're going to get into. I felt that it was a very smart move on Kieron's behalf to strip this back and really shine the light on these kind of stories that have to be confrontational, in a sense that they have to make you sit up and realise that this shit is going on in people's lives in 2023 and years leading up to it. It's a book I like to get out every so often and just remind myself, and it makes me feel that as a person who hasn't had to deal with this, I certainly do have a role to play in contributing to the voice against this kind of bullshit, and that's what I want to do when I cover these kind of topics. It's an incredible showcase of graphic activism in a way that you don't think of when you hear the word activism. I think the default mindset is kind of placards or grandiose stunts, and that is valid too in the right way when it's done properly. But as a writer, as an author, of a big lover of books, this really got me going because of the format as well. There's a subtlety in books and an ownership, and there's time for it to sit in and marinate, and I think that's really important too. But I've talked enough. We're going to get into it. I hope you enjoy. I want your feedback as ever at Ben Talent, or it's now changed, the Creative Condition _ on Instagram. And I think Twitter. I think the change went through on there. God knows. Anyway, I've gone on enough. Big thanks to the sponsor, Illustration X. Head over to Kieron Lewis, that's Kieron Lewis.com, to check out Kieron's awesome work. Feedback on the email is also fine. hello@bentalent.com. And if you do have time, please support this show by dropping a little review on your preferred platform, be it Spotify or SoundCloud or Google Pods. Because it really does help me, and it goes a long way. And I do this thing for pure passion, for love, out of my own schedule. And I just want to champion creativity. I want it to find its right place in society at the very top of the tree. And just tell a friend. Little review, little subscription. They're the ways to help. So cheers for listening, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with graphic designer Kieron Lewis.
I really enjoyed school. I mean, if we're going to go right really far back, I remember in school thinking I really enjoyed drawing. I enjoyed the two important classes for me was art and English. And that's because I really enjoyed writing and I loved basically drawing. And I didn't know at the time that would be a career, but I had a feeling I would want to do something that touches on what I enjoy doing in general, even if it's down the line, but whatever that might be. And with the English side of things, it's funny because now where I'm doing, articles for blogs or I'm doing hosting, there's elements where I have to tap into that, that reading and writing skills, which sometimes I don't necessarily do in my full time as a creative, right? So it's quite nice to kind of tap into that. And then kind of going into education, I went to Southampton Solent University. I was studying video game design at one stage, and that was a weird period because that was a year of um, so actually, I don't know why. Actually, no, I know why I did it because I was really interested in gaming. That was my thing back growing up as a kid. But graphic design is really what I should be doing, and that's what I ended up doing. So I changed courses after that first year, and then went to Winchester School of Art to get my degree in marketing, branding, and graphic design.
Mm.
And so you need a year out to kind of realize what you want to be doing. Within that year of doing game design, we did live drawing, animation. There's still elements in there that I did take into my graphic design pathway when I changed courses. But I think I just needed that moment of still not realizing really what I 100% wanted to do, and you just felt like you had to just know what you want to do because you now left school. Well, you left you left school. What is the next thing you do next? So it kind of felt like a bit of a deer in the headlights kind of moment. But then I really found my feet in Winchester School of Art where I got my degree, and that was great 3 years for sure.
Yeah, that was an interesting place to go. I live in Salisbury now, so I'm just down the road
Okay.
from Winchester. Yeah, so yeah, that's I've only been a handful of times to the city, but it looks really cool.
It's nice. It's almost a Hogwarts like. I always describe it as because obviously I grew up in South London, Brixton, which you couldn't. I mean, you could even the difference in terms of location and area and culture of people is so vast. But I think that was the beauty of being able to kind of tap into that people skills of how you kind of operate in different cultures and different people and surroundings and settings. Where you grew up in South London, but then you go to uni in say Winchester, you
Mm.
meet walks of life. So I think it was quite nice to kind of tap into those elements of different types of friends that you wouldn't necessarily have growing up. And that's kind of that mentality of being able to be respectful of other people. I've kind of honed in on that even as an adult now, growing up into the freelance world, which I think kind of I use that a lot with my people skills. I think with the freelance clients that I work with now, as a backing because of what I've done whilst at uni.
Well, this is something that I feel gets a little swept under the carpet now because of the fees, with education and everything. Whereas actually, no matter what you're studying, it's about gaining independence and finding your feet away from the family for people who decide to
Mm-hmm.
go that path. I mean, it's certainly a bigger part of what I took from it as much as a degree.
100%. People forget as well. Uni. It is the working side elements, but it's also just being a human. Being an adult. Having to live out of home, having to cook for yourself, sustain yourself. It's all those basics. And I always say that you don't have to go to uni, of course, because it's not for everyone. University, but if you're able to go and even stay on campus and elements, you will learn so much about yourself. How you interact with other people, and then that's valued people skills as you grow up in as an adulthood. So yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and as you said, it's something that's really quite important in our industry, especially when you're freelancing. You have to work with a really broad spread of people from different backgrounds, and it's somebody said to me, I did an episode last week with a guy called Jeffrey Madoff. He's like a producer in New York, and he said he was talking about personal branding, and he sort of said I don't buy into the whole personal branding thing. He said, yeah, okay, you've got the logo and you've got the visual identity and everything else. But he said to me, personal branding is what people say about you when you've just left the meeting room.
That's so true. Like a fly on the wall, but you'll never be there, and you wouldn't realise what they really say.
And I think that speaks to what you say there about that, the need to be able to kind of operate in all these different circles. If you just learn to kind of embrace people and tolerate difference with people, then I think that's then you're good on that front.
You know what I've always said when I've gone to events, especially design, creative events, whether it's in East London or wherever parts of London. When I go to an event when you've got amazing, talented, super talented professional people, what are they like socially? I always wonder what are they like kids in school, because I always think of it as a little bit of you could be the most talented person in the world, but if you're socially awkward, it's very difficult to
Mm.
have a conversation. Or I mean, shyness is that's not what we're discussing. It's more the idea of being able to just, put that facade beside and actually just be, fairly transparent and just be comfortable. I think, the more you feel comfortable in yourself, then that kind of projects out to how people perceive you as well. So for me, it's. I mean, I like talking to people in general. I like meeting people, and I think that's putting aside the design skills. That's fed in a lot into how what I'm doing now with different clients because of that people skills and that vibe we have at that initial early stage.
Yeah, very much so. And I think if you like you said, if you really learn to own exactly who you are naturally and how you feel comfortable, that's confidence. And this came up on another show and a conversation I had, and it was about this idea that people often take confidence as being brash or kind of loud, and it's really not. It's confidence with your own nature, really, and then once you've got that, then you find your circles, don't you?
100%. But it's definitely there as well. You do within places that I worked at, mainly in the advertising space. So I won't, of course, no names because I'm a professional on my part. But you do find you're still going to get those individuals where the cockiness or the arrogance, and I mean that's just people in general with different groups of people, not just our industry. It's just humans, and I think the more you work at different places, the more you navigate and understand how people are in certain situations, and then you kind of know, okay, well, that's the people I might want to stay away from, or people that you feel like, oh, okay, we could work well together. Let's make it happen. But yeah, I moving forward, I've always been, if we vibe really well and there's an energy, and it makes life a lot easier and a lot more transparent for both parties, really, moving forward.
Absolutely. So in terms of the first professional steps, then, did you have a sense when you were studying where you wanted to go in the industry, or did you kind of do some stumbling?
Actually, it was my second year at uni. I was able to have an internship at an advertising agency in Barbican, and it was my friend's dad who owned a company. Which again, back that people, I mean, people who that plays a massive part. I won't even deny that. And that helped a lot because I was able to. I remember being so nervous. Even thinking back to it now, I feel nervous thinking about it because it was an exciting experience, but because you're in that space where you're working with live clients, you're working on deadlines, briefs, it's so different to uni experience, right? And I think I learned so much in that. What I was doing, I was going back every summer while I was in my second year. So second year summer, and then the third year I went back as well. And what was cool about that is that I started to build quite a nice rapport with those who I worked with. Um, I worked with some really good clients whilst being there. I was able to use the skills that I learned in the internship and then apply it back to uni as well. So not necessarily the design skills. It was design skills, but also just how to articulate yourself, how to deliver briefs, how to explain your rationales for a project. Because I always think growing up, even going back into school days, I talk really fast. That's always been something I've always had, and I ramble because I think it's something in my head. I know what it is I want to say, and you assume well, no one else knows what you want to say until you say it. That's how conversation works. And I think those elements of knowing to just take your time and speak and digest and really think about what you want to say first before saying it. I learned that heavily whilst in this internship. And then when I left uni, I was up at a full-time placement as a junior designer. So that was my first jump in straight out of uni. So I was quite fortunate to have that almost that springboard into the industry straight after graduation.
I have this. I have the speed talking's a thing for me too. It's like
The
I've
thing.
constantly checked for it growing up, and it's like, oh God, I've really got to what you. Now, I mean, this thing has been really helpful for that actually. But occasionally, I get excited and I just fall back into it, and then somebody will comment on the podcasts, and it's just like you talk too fast.
I'm waiting for the days where you can do briefing through interpretive dance. That's all you really need to do. Just do a little Highland jig or something, and then you'll be able to know what
Yeah.
people are really trying to say. But yeah, it's just like you said, it's just really think about what you want to say first before saying it. And that's not a bad thing in general. That's just a life thing, isn't it? I think that can be applied to any walks of life.
Yes, 100%. So let's talk about Olga and Kay. What were the origins of that collaboration?
Yeah, Olga and Kay. So it's so Olga and Kay is a creative collaboration with myself and Olga Kotoska, who's a Latvian freelance photographer and videographer, and we met. Oh my goodness me, we met back in 2016, and we met on a photo shoot. So Olga was freelance at the photo shoot that I was at, and it's weird because we just started to just talk really like vibe really well. We had conversations about the work that we're both working on, things that we enjoyed doing, and one thing that was quite apparent to me when I first met Olga was because where she grew up in Latvia, and obviously I grew up in South London, Brixton, we had such different childhoods growing up. And we were talking about like growing up as kids and things that we've seen growing up and like even, how we perceive design from our areas that we've grown up in. And I think we could tell straight away that we were both on the same page where we were both fascinated about our personal stories, about how we grew up and whatnot. And then after that shoot, I think we must have I dropped her an email maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 months later, just said, do you want to grab a coffee by South Bank? Grabbed a coffee, and then we started to talk about ideas for our project. We just started to talk about ideas of the idea of going around different communities and just taking photographs and speaking to people. That's literally it. There was no, I don't want to pretend like there was a massive, blue ball print or any, fine line. It was pretty much just the idea of us wanting to take some really good photos and then use those imagery or assets and maybe create like a zine or something that we could share with our friends or people, not necessarily selling shops, but just to share with friends or people that we know, so that people have an idea about the community and about different communities. And on the back of that, we went to Brixton Market. And for anyone who knows Brixton Market, if you know Brixton Market, I grew up in Brixton as well, so I know Brixton very well, but Olga obviously didn't. And we both went to Brixton Market, and I remember it's incredible the people that you meet there. And I think more so because of how different it's changed over the years from when I was there as well, in a sense that, there's all different walks of life as well. So we took some photographs of people in the area, spoke to people in the community, took some recordings as well. And then we just started to kind of create like little mini zines for these. And then we just thought, well, actually, if we're starting to do stuff separate to our actual full-time work, by the way, we just thought, why don't we actually just do this as like a regular, mates hang out, go to different areas of London, or not just London, anywhere we can find together, travel, take photographs, make it into a little magazine just for our own purpose. And that stemmed off from doing that. And then we ended up, sounds crazy, but we ended up having the opportunity to work with Westminster City Council to end up basically giving talks at schools and universities. So we ended up showing the magazines that we would work on. We showed photographs of the people that we took. And then my job really as a designer, because obviously Olga being a photographer, was to get all these assets and then create an editorial piece. So I would showcase this in the events that we spoke at. And I think that was cool. I think for myself and Olga, like we've always, we're very good friends, which makes life so much easier when you work together, because it's just, she will tell me straight up if something is wrong. And I love that because the honesty's there, the transparency's there. And we just can't be working ever since then. I mean, at the moment now, it's been a little bit slower because obviously life kicking in and COVID happening, all these elements that made everyone kind of stop for a bit. But for me and how Olga and I see it, Olga and Kay, something that will always it will be there, because as long as we're still friends, which she's one of my closest friends, it will always still be there. There's a project that comes up, we'll jump on it. Or if someone wants us to give a talk at a school, which we've done a lot of talks at schools about the idea of collaborating and being aware of your community. We'll just keep on doing it as a result of it. So there was a lot of rambling on, but hopefully that makes sense in terms of.
No, absolutely, it wasn't rambling at all. And what's great about that is, and I shared this in a bit of a post recently, and it was about personal projects, and how there's a tendency for a lot of people as designers to go straight to the context and the project aspect and really undervalue the personal aspect of a personal project. And it sounds to me like you didn't kind of come blazing out the traps with a formed idea and everything else, which I think is beautiful. And I would you agree that that's really important in terms of letting the work come to life first and letting it be in its organic form, and then see what it might work in? Because isn't that the fun, and isn't that the joy of personal projects?
100%. I think because as designers, I'm a bit of a perfectionist and I overthink as well. I know that for a fact. And I think it was very easy to, okay, if we're going to work together, what is the end goal? Are we going to be selling? How do we make money? Like, how do we sustain all these elements? But bearing in mind, this was separate to our actual full-time. Olga's a freelancer, I was full-time at the time. This was separate to our actual, what allowed us to make money for our living. So this was very much just for the fun of it, really, and for the enjoyment of it. And I think it organically grew because we started to put, our energy into it. So we'll meet up on the weekends, we'll grab a coffee, we'll grab brunch, and then we'll start talking about ideas for a project. And, there was obviously we had, certain rules in terms of maybe some ideas for deadlines and things we want to actually produce and when. But what was quite cool is that, like you said, organically things kind of just grew. And then we started to make a lot of connections and friends throughout events we went to. And I think that when I'm with Olga on stage as well, it's one of those ones when we're giving talks. It's so important to um, I think when you've got good energy with someone that you work very closely with, it complements you and you complement each other. So for me, when I'm on the stage with Olga and I'm talking at an event, or even when I'm talking at schools, which can be quite daunting when you've got, say, an assembly hall of, I don't know, 70 kids, and you think, oh crikey, if I don't say something, remotely intelligent or something that's substantial, they're gonna whatever. But when you've got someone like Olga, where even if I'm a bit lost in my thoughts or we're on stage and something happens, she's got my back, and vice versa. So it is very much, we are collaborative. We work together on projects when we can, but we're close friends first and foremost. And I think that is the real, heartbeat of how we operate as a collaborative. So yeah, to answer your question, that's kind of how we've kind of organically grown. And then when we have opportunity to collaborate with other people or charities, we've had the opportunity to do it over the years, which has been really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Homeless Heroes Aid. I think that's fantastic, and so just gives a little snapshot of that.
Sure, yeah. So we collaborated with a homeless charity called Homeless Heroes Aid, and they basically work with veterans who, once they've come out of from the war, it's difficult for them sometimes to integrate back into society. So this platform's kind of there to help them get back onto how to integrate in the community. And Olga and I think we connected with them via, I think it was on social media, on LinkedIn perhaps. And then we met up for a coffee and we started to sort of, bounce ideas for something we could work on together. And the thing that really struck out for us was the amount of homeless people there are in London. There's a lot of homeless people, which we all kind of, see on a day-to-day basis. And Olga and I and the Homeless Heroes Day team, we worked on a project called Touch Magazine. And the very basic overview was that we went to different parts of London, we visited different parts of London, and we would interview those who were homeless, obviously with their permission. We spoke to them, we photographed them, we transcribed, we got their information through recording the conversation we had, and then we transcribed it and we made it into a physical print. And the idea was that with this print that we created called Touch Magazine, and I'll explain in a minute why it was called Touch, but the idea of this magazine was that not to sell into shops, but when we give talks at schools, we use it as an educational tool to actually show how it's possible to collaborate and to work on projects that is about your community and show something that's a physical format. So that's why we did it on the basis of that. And the reason why it's called Touch was because one thing that was even more apparent to us is that when we walk past someone who's homeless, people don't tend to actually engage, especially physically, of any nature. So the one thing that when we found we spoke to a lot of people who were homeless was that a lot of them actually don't want money. It was a conversation, just a chat, and that really, I think we all of us that was there at the day, me, myself, Olga, and Homeless Heroes Day, we learned quite a lot about even how we perceive homelessness as well. So we thought if that's how we're seeing it, imagine being able to share this body of work with schools or colleges or younger people, so that they're able to have a bit of an idea about how they perceive homelessness, and then hopefully something could come from it in terms of how they can move forward. So yeah, that was a nice project to work on. Quite an impactful project because, like I said, the stories are very hard hitting, of course, because some of them have been for some traumatic periods. But like the one that was really obvious was just the fact that the one overarching theme was that people just wanted an honest chat, a conversation about how they're doing and how they're feeling, and and obviously the money helps, of course, for physical things or for food or whatever. But that idea of having human interaction is so important, and it's just a basic necessity, you think, in human life, but they don't have it. So yeah, that magazine, I think, was something that we're quite proud of, that we're able to collaborate with Homeless Heroes Aid on.
It's really wonderful, warm work, and I saw it mentioned, when you're talking about Olga and Kay, about the desire to create meaningful work, and I think in today's society we have a major role to play as visual communicators, and not just visual communicators, but but writers and the likes, and those kind of collaborations, because the right to protest is under threat. We're living in challenging times democratically, and I think that therefore us as creatives and visual communicators, we're going to need to be clever and be subversive and treat different projects in different ways. But I really see a rising value in what we do, and that's not to give ourselves any badge of honor, but actually there's great power in visual communication.
100%,
Is that
100%.
something you always felt drawn to, or was that something that developed through the collaboration or some other way?
Yeah, I think I've always, even going back to school days, I'm a visual person. I think I need to, how my brain operates. It's I like to think I'm quite an easygoing chap and very very simple in the sense that put it this way, I wasn't very good at maths. I mean, that was always a thing in school, and that's probably why I have an accountant, just for that reason. But I think when I see things visually or able to, if I'm getting a lot of information being given to me, I have to kind of draw things out or write pen to paper because, once I see it in quite a clear format in that way, it's easy for me to digest.
Hmm.
And that even goes into how I work with clients now, where I'm gonna be given a project, and when you have that initial briefing where you're kind of bombarded with a lot of content, a lot of information, just go right back to step one and just kind of strategically, write it out or even draw it out in my case, of how things would look, and then always refer back to that. And that's kind of my methodology or way of thinking in life in general, not even just with work. Just I'm very visual in general, so I think that's helped over the years for me to understand and
Yeah.
digest things better. So I think, well, if I can understand it in that way, I can't be the only one who understands or sees things visually better. So let's try and work in that space and see who else can rapport with me on that front as well. So yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of the meaningful work aspect of things, I wanted to ask was because when I first came to London to promote my work, when I first started freelancing, I used to stay at the Hootenanny in Brixton.
Oh yeah, I was literally my road was two roads behind that. I
Is
know
that
exactly.
right? Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I fell in love with Brixton quite quickly. I loved the energy there, and I mean, it's changed quite a lot since then. This would have been 2008, and but there's a I know people in Brixton who didn't even know that you could stay at the Hootenanny, and it's a hostel
True.
above it, and it was great. You got a free meal each day there, and we come and get involved in the nights down there, and it was just a great raucous energy.
Yeah.
But that growing up in Brixton, and that energy that you described there about the market, do you think that played any part in your interest in these quite human centric projects?
I think so, definitely. I think it's funny because I always say some with my wife, for example, so she's from Spain. And again, when we first met, the idea of her childhood and my childhood very, very different growing up. And I always think for anyone who's ever been to Brixton and you try to describe to them what Brixton's like, or the energy, it's like it doesn't sleep. The area does not sleep. And regardless of how it's changed over the years, it's still such live wire in the sense that, and it's kind of place where growing up as a child, I'm talking the age of like 13 going to school with my backpack, massive backpack, long school tie, walking through Brixton Market, and the smells you get, the people you meet, everyone saying hello, like people smile, whatever. And there's a lot happening. And I think there's elements of there where that kind of maybe sharpen my skills in the sense of maybe being a bit confident as well. So I think when you're in it, and bit of background, my family are from Jamaica. Jamaica and America, they're kind of split down the middle. On the Jamaican side, they're quite confident. They kind of tell me. I mean, culturally, they kind of, especially on my grandparents' side, it is what it is with them, which I like as well. I appreciate that. There's no faff, right? And I think that's the kind of not that I've adopted that mentality, but I think that helps me as well to be really clear what I'm trying to get across. The idea of maybe growing up, I would kind of faff around, or when I'm explaining something, there's a lot of waffle. But I think just get to really what you're trying to do and get to what you're trying to say. And I think that came from just being immersed in an area like a Brixton, or going to like a family gathering where everyone is similar like that, which also I think worked for me when I went to say Winchester, because obviously, like I mentioned, they're very different areas. But using the things I learned growing up as a child and going to a place like that where, it was difficult because obviously I felt very different, even looking very different as well. It is a thing. But I think it was the fact that because I was quite comfortable in my skin from very young, it allowed me to speak to people who maybe necessarily, people might not think I would have spoken to them, or be in an area where I feel, well, actually, I should, there's no reason why I shouldn't feel like I can't be in a space like this. So that's always been my mentality growing up. And, moving forward, I think, everyone I meet, or even when I give talks at schools, I always try to encourage that idea that when you're comfortable in yourself, regardless if you want to be a designer or any other craft of life, that will always help, because then you need to kind of have that energy, that positive vibe about yourself first before you can project to others. So I've had that mentality, and I think that's helped me kind of through life up until now.
That's really interesting. Yeah, yeah. Which brings us on to them in this stunning project, Still Breathing. How did it come about in the first place? Like, because it's HarperCollins, right?
It's HarperCollins, Still Breathing. Oh, that was a project. My goodness. it is quite an emotional one to even discuss because it was so. Let's go back now. So 2 years ago, was it? It was 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. Just pretty much when I was just starting out on freelance, um, I was approached by HarperCollins. In fact, let's go even further back. I used to work on a project called TEDx Houston with a few other creatives and friends of mine, and there was a lady there called Nancy, who's a good friend of mine. Now Nancy works at HarperCollins, parallel to doing TEDx at the time when I was with her. Um, and Nancy put me forward as a designer to HarperCollins, so they reached out to me about this book. Now, kind of fast forward to them reaching out to me, and bearing in mind when I went freelance, obviously, I had some clients that I could go back to, but HarperCollins being a not the smallest brand in the world, right? So they're quite a big brand that to do a project like a Still Breathing, which is a 300 plus page hardback book, as one of your first freelance projects. I mean, nervous doesn't even cut it because it's like a single swim kind of moment, right? There is a lot to take in. But I can honestly say that with a project such as this, it really made it a lot easier having the team at HarperCollins who were very transparent and very easy to work with. So I worked with multiple people at the team, but there was two people in particular. One called Rose Sandy, who I work with even now on projects, and Bengono Belessa. And they were the two kind of main contacts that I work with at HarperCollins. So we would have endless calls, we would discuss content, designs. And I think what made it easier was that we had a really clear plan of what we're trying to achieve. And that was right down from the content, right down to, how the book should look, designs and a real plan. And that made life a bit easier for me in terms of how do I break down a mammoth project of this scale. That because obviously this was parallel to even other freelance work I was doing on top. So a 300 plus hardback book is something that maybe people will just do as a one project and that will be it. But I'm when I went freelance, my wife and I we just bought our first property. Life kicks in, so you need to make it, you got to pay the mortgage, all these things happening. So I knew I had to kind of sustain it. But yeah, I found the balance. I was able to work on this project, and I think it was about maybe a 4 5 month project in itself. So yeah.
It's wonderful. And how did you feel reading the stories? Because that must have had some personal resonance.
Sure, I should probably get back. So Still Breathing is it's a book publication which features 100 Black individuals, creatives from all different walks of life, whether they're in the music industry, politicians, fashion, and whatnot, and it's sharing their lived experiences of racism in their sector. So you can imagine when you've got 100 people sharing their experience of racism in their space. It's not a project where I'm talking simply on the content side of things now. It's not a project where you can just lay it out as a designer and not feel somewhat affected by what you're reading, especially as a black creative myself. So to answer your question, it was difficult. I think it was something that I knew a project like this is so important to work on, not even just for the fact that it's my very first, big major client job as a freelancer, but I think the idea of I don't know how many projects I'll get an opportunity to work on that touches on such a sensitive topic, and more so that I can feel like I can relate to on an emotional scale. So it kind of felt to me that I need to make this the best of what I can achieve as a designer. But more importantly, people when they read it, it needs to feel like something that is going to hit home with them and digest, because it's not a book that you sit in you digest in one sitting. It's a hardback. There's a lot of content. It's very condensed in terms of the information. Um, so there's a lot to take in, which is actually going to the design briefly. That's kind of why I've gone down this typographic route with the design, because it felt to me, if I was to create a book which has such a deep content and deep impact about what it's discussing, and you're kind of just showing it with loads of imagery, it doesn't really get across what the people are trying to share in terms of experiences. So obviously you've got the text all in grid formats, but I've typographically pulled out key comments or key quotes relating to the real nucleus of what they're trying to get across at that individual. So that's a lot of the book that you'll see. There's typographic um, you know uh, spreads that I've worked on and created so that people can at least get a feel for that particular section before they go into the actual meat and drink, i.e. the whole content, because there's a lot to go through. And I remember putting that forward to the team about going on a typographic route. And honestly, it's funny because they were the client that they're a massive client, but there was very straight. I think because obviously, again, like I said, I had two people in particular I worked with. They were very easy to get along with, and we were very transparent from the get go. So when I put that forward of being typographic, they were really up for the idea. And I kind of thought, oh, crikey, does that mean all freelance jobs I have are going to be super straightforward? Maybe not, but for as an initial, early naive stage of my freelance career, it was very straightforward to. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still a lot of work to do, and you're going to have. And there was a lot of times where it's very, creative block. But like I said, it was the idea of working on a project that is going to be bigger than yourself once it is, printed and put in shops. And it was, because there's a lot of things that's come off the back of that. So
yeah. I mean, I think it's absolutely the right approach. I mean, I've spent a lot of time reading it these past few weeks. It's stunning, by the way. It's so well produced. But it's the clarity is essential because of the gravity of the topic. I mean, it's very. I felt a lot of emotions myself reading this, and I haven't had to experience this, So that clarity, and I think it was Suzette that said in an interview that this issue, racism, can be perceived as very nebulous, and I thought that was the nail on the head, because nebulous is everything this book couldn't be. Because I mean, let's face it, some of these experiences that people have had to go through could not be visually communicated in any kind of nebulous way. So I think your typographic approach is very, very powerful. I think it grabs you the moment you land on a spread, which it has to do by the scruff of the neck. And then the range in the way people are telling the stories is really quite impressive, from poetry to almost short stories, and then there's very real, just told as it was accounts. So to find that consistency, the typographic, did that start to flow quite quick once you got working in that way?
I want to say yes. I mean, I remember setting my InDesign document and thinking, I've never seen so many pages onto one document. There's a lot of, when you've got a 300-page book plus book, it's almost like after the first, 70 individuals, you think, how many more ways can I think of a typographic route to it's just like each one needs to feel unique in itself. And that was the reason why I did it, because each one, this is not something that you put in one category and all 100 people fit in it. Yes, in one book, but each one is its own unique experience. So it needs to feel like a unique, individual spread as you go through each single one, which is through color and the type. But yeah, I there was a lot of moments where I had creative blocks, and I just had to step away from the computer. I had to, for my own sanity. And that was, like I said, it was great because my wife and I, she was studying at the time, so she was at home a lot. So we were both at home working. So the opportunity to kind of go for a walk to the lakes, or just to step away, or go to a gallery, or just something just so separate from a computer. And I think that helped to give me a bit of clarity of how I envision moving forward. I kind of live by my Moleskine books. I've got a collection of them, which I always mention in talks I give, but I generally have them in the back pocket because I could be on a bus or a train or literally anywhere, supermarket, and an idea for, that's a bit weird to say, but an idea for a spread, editorial spread, might come to mind just from something I've seen. So I have to quickly just draw it out. I have to, for my sanity. Or honestly, I can't tell you enough how many times I'm going off piece now. How many times I've been in bed and then I just wake up randomly and my wife's like, he's gone again. Like, I've just had to draw something. I have to just draw something because it will go. My mind's very quick like that. It will just go. And I think it's important to give yourself those moments to step away, because that's how things can, like organically come your way without having to chase it down. And that helped for the process of this book, without a doubt.
Yeah. And it's just so striking. And, it's interesting because I did an interview. What I find interesting is the different approaches to dealing with heavy topics, be they personal or be they, and the thing with this book is, let's face it, it's 100 people, so you have to find a common voice, right? Within that, a common visual language. Then you go to the other end of the scale. So I interviewed a friend of mine called Adelaide Namoa, who's British Ghanaian, last week, and she's doing this incredible lifelong project, and it's called Confronting the Colonizer. So she's dealing with these images of her great grandmother from what was then known as the British Gold Coast back in Ghana. And it's kind of this, she halfway through exploring this project, she switched from what was figurative painting back then, that she did a lot of, to then this amazing performance piece where she channels the kind of great grandmother's spirit. And it's just this mind-blowing, immensely personal project. And I love that, because, and then I've got another friend, Dewinda Bansal, who deals with, she was first generation of British-born South Asian people, grew up in Wolverhampton, and a lot of her projects deal with themes within that. but she does kind of these theatre productions, so full-on installations and rooms, and she did one called The Making of a South Asian Wedding, which is where we first met. And it's amazing. So she's created this full, all singing, all dancing, 80s front room. And it's great because what you got, it was at the Festival of Making in Blackburn, and what you had is all these different people from different backgrounds walking into this front room, and there's a full-on wedding ceremony taking place. You could make samosas with the ladies from the Curry Club in Blackburn, and it was such a fun carnival atmosphere. But what you saw was people walking in, and you would see, so for example, you see local white families walk in and look a little bit like, okay, what's going on here? Yeah. Walk in the room, and then just before you know it, there's conversations going on. They're making samosas with the ladies, and it was such an incredibly, what's the word, tactile, quiet way of presenting, and just allowing people to walk in and interpret it for themselves. And what you got was people going, well, this is like my nan's living room was, regardless of my own heritage. So what across the spread of your project here, this Still Breathing and those two, is just the amazing range that people use creativity to deal with these very heavy topics. I mean, it blows my mind.
That's such an interesting. When you said straight about this, that what you mentioned about that space, straight away I thought of the word immersiveness. Just the idea of being immersed within that space, and because it is, let's be honest, it's a conversation that, or even the idea of difference, can be uncomfortable for a lot of people. A book like this, or even the event you just described now, some people can feel very uncomfortable, and I think there's no way of sugarcoating what this is about. That's the idea of why we need to create books like this or have conversations that it's not sugarcoated. But the one thing I think that we can do, and we can always do better, is how we deliver the message across, how we're trying to get it across, because obviously everyone has different ways of digesting information. And when you've got something that is physical, where rather than going to an event or like a lecture and you're being spoken to at, when you've got a book or something like this, you're able to take it at your own leisure and digest it in whatever way you feel more comfortable. And I think that's something, even like I said, my wife being Spanish and very different, she's read a lot of the spreads in the book as well. And she's had to, she's thought about certain things in her own life as well, which she wasn't a part of as well. So I think there's a lot of things that a book like this can really educate many, many people in terms of like how other people actually have lived those experiences, and things are just more apparent to them, because at the time it just maybe doesn't seem as apparent now, but obviously we see in the media it very much is. But the book itself, it is a very powerful book. I can't stress enough. If when you read it, it's something that, you want to be human if you don't feel some sort of emotion reading some of the spreads. So from my side as a designer, it was incredible to design it and to visually articulate everyone's experiences, but more so that once it was printed and it was done, and it's this is 2 years on now, the book's been out now just under 2 years, that the book is still in conversation, and there's still events that are happening as a result of it. People are discussing it, and it's being a part of a project that's bigger than yourself. It's not just me in my room designing, which as it was, but once it's out, people are discussing it, and that's, for me, that was the goal. Not just making cool designs that it looks good. It's once it's out, people digesting it, having conversations about it. How does it then make an impact on community and society, and people reflect, and actually, even more importantly, make action as a result of what they've read. That needs to be the kind of way forward, and hopefully it's slowly getting there bit by bit of the more things people will push out these days.
Yeah, and I think that you spend a moment with each of these people, and that goes back to the nebulous thing, because when if you're a person who, let's say you come from a background where there aren't a lot of different cultures to your own, and then you sort of hear about racism, there's a danger that you hear that kind of, perhaps it's a generation above you, and they make those conclusions on their take on it without ever having spoken to a person who's experienced it.
Very true.
And therefore you spend some time with each of these people, and actually, it's much like your projects for the homeless heroes. It humanizes every person, which everyone deserves. And I just think it's done in such a powerful, clear way, and had to, like you said, it had to be for those reasons. And what's beautiful about it is, I had one of my closest friends is a black man from Holloway originally. So I've heard through Danny, my friend, I've heard occasional experiences about being, let's say, stopped by a police officer, and that makes me incredibly angry because I love him like a brother. But what that is that's just a tiny window. That's one person's experiences. So that can't speak for anyone beyond just Danny. This can and does. very
Yeah.
effectively. And I think that what it does for me is yes, it makes me angry, it makes me upset at times, but it also empowers me because I studied graphic activism for my dissertation at university. So I've always been very passionate about the power of visual communication. And it's much like you said there, Kieron, about you being a person who sees the world and expresses themselves visually quite naturally. I'm very much that too. I'm not confrontational in the slightest. I go to pieces in confrontation. I get a little egged very quick. Adrenaline starts flowing. Give me half an hour to sit down and write that out in a story, and I can articulate it fantastically. Or I can create a piece of art that says a million times more than that. So I think that this book as a piece of work also speaks to the power of that.
Yeah, I mean I echo everything you just said. I think that was for us, that was pretty much the mission of why we did a book like this. I think it's funny because when the book was out, it was yeah, of course it was during COVID. Yeah, it was during the COVID, actually, the early stage of COVID. I remember it was difficult even getting the assets together, or doing, like, in an ideal world you do like a a 2-day photo shoot with everyone featured for consistency of photographs and whatnot, but we couldn't do that, so we had to rely on people sending imagery over. And you can imagine 100 people from all different parts of London, or even England for that matter, sending different assets at all different times. I want to say it was easy. It wasn't, but it's all part of the process, right, of going through and editing and whatnot. But once the book was done, we had a book launch, and I was able to meet a lot of the people that was featured in the book at the event, and it was honestly such a surreal experience because I felt like I met them already because of me designing their spreads, and and reading some of the content and seeing him and to meet him in the person. It was almost emotional, actually, if I'm really honest with you, because, like you said, you feel like everyone in that book, you've had an insight into something that was traumatic to them, or something that they felt like they need to express and share with the world. So to see them in person and to talk to them as well. I mean, there wasn't obviously 100 people at the event. There was a good few, but I think it was nice just to see them and speak to them. And yeah, it felt like we had done justice to what they were trying to achieve when they gave us the content, because you never know, again, how people will see it in terms of as a design as well. So yeah, that was really cool to see people, how they interact with it, that were featured there. And like I said, we had events since then. We've had exhibitions as well, which was cool. I had an exhibition in Brighton a few months back, and that was cool to actually see folks in that space interacting with the designs on the wall. Yeah, it is a weird but awesome experience. Because, like I said, it was my very first project as well as a freelancer. So I thought, if I can conquer that, surely it should be smooth sailing, right? I don't know, moving forward. Yeah, that's not how my life is anyway, as we know.
Was it empowering for you to get to work on a project like this as a black man?
Oh, understatement, 100%, 100%. I on the back of this, like I said, when being stocked in the shops and having events, I was able to even give talks at Adobe Max as well. So I spoke at Adobe Max the same year it came out, and I shared the book. I was even flown out to Washington to give a talk at an event, which I said that as if that happens, casually. It doesn't. That was one of those events where you're able to go and to share a publication like this. But I think from my side, it was also quite a nerve-wracking experience, because the event as well is called Creative Pro Week, which was a fantastic event for people to show how they operate and work within design programs and show work that they've created. I'm flown out to Washington from London, showing a book about racism to a room primarily of white people. So you can imagine how that would have felt for me, being on stage and being able to talk and articulate it. But I was nervous, to be very, very honest, but also I felt I'm doing the right thing here by being able to share something that is important, and also to describe my design process. And the people, when they approached me after my talk, it was very, very, the comments were amazing. And I think it was more, how they perceived it, and how, they digest the information, and hopefully what things they can do in their own lives to try and, be more aware of individuals that have to go through something like this on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, there's been a lot that's happened as a result of working these books. And even now, a lot of the clients I work with, it ranges, but a lot of it is now around race of some sort, or community, which is perfect for me, because I never anticipated that would be the space that I'll be working within, in terms of work. But it is very much, I'm working on another hardback publication with a publisher in the US, and it is touching on Black families in particular, which I can't say too much yet because it's still in the process. But again, it's nice because we're very much in this space of working on projects involving, the Black community and sharing with the public. So yeah, it's cool to work in that space.
That's so wonderful to hear, actually, as well. And it was interesting because, I think, so with big issues like this. So one of my biggest sort of demons is the climate crisis. I get quite low on that sometimes,
Mm.
and it feels insurmountable. And there's always in my life, creativity has been the way I can work through the insurmountable things, the monsters in my life, so to speak. And I heard a great comment, and it was from George Monbiot, and he was talking about how we start to turn the tide, how we can convince people to talk about an issue like the climate crisis, which people don't want to confront for obvious reasons because it's terrifying. But he talked about how we can't, we should. Yes, we preach to the choir, but he said we have to we have to preach to people just outside the choir. He said we don't take that approach of kind of grandstanding to people who are completely the
Mm.
opposite end of the scale. So in that context, let's say people who just either don't believe it, won't talk about it, don't want to entertain the idea, and then will throw every other dubious fact at
Mm.
the issue to whether it's self-comfort. I don't know. I can't speak about that, but I love that. I love that idea of preaching to people just outside of the choir, and people who are willing to listen, people who are good people, but maybe just haven't had this in their life, whatever the issue might be. So I think what you said about that, doing that talk to a room full of white people, I think that's incredibly powerful, actually. And what this book does, and what doing things like that does, talks, I think, is just you see eye to eye with people, and it individualizes it. Which, when you do that, we're people. I don't believe that people are born evil. I think that
Yeah.
there's something there about speaking to people and remaining calm enough to have rational conversations, to speak like we might in a pub, rather than this horrible toxic culture of tweets and everything else, which is, horrid. These conversations should be carried out in pubs, where we can all.
I was just thinking that when you said that, I was like, that's why it's substituted with alcohol. Which, I mean, I'm not condoning it, of course, but I think it's something that people use it as a substitute. But I think it's more, it allows you to feel more relaxed, right? Whether it's alcohol or anything else in general for that matter, it's something that when you want to have maybe a real deep chat about something, if you can't, you use something to help you then be able to talk about it, if that makes sense, whether that is alcohol or any other means of it. But like I said, maybe it's a case of just taking more a step forward and just breathe. Do you know what's funny? Even yoga. I know I'm gonna go off piece here, but I've done a lot more recently. My wife and I've been doing a lot of breathing exercises or things like yoga, and I think it's just being able to just step away and maybe meditate or just breathe and just think a bit more clearly and rational and just stop. Maybe taking a step back. I think even going back into the days of COVID when we had lockdown, everyone's got various different experiences of what it was like for them. I think for us, it was a case of having time to just stop because we have to stop. And actually, it was moments to actually really reflect on what we we're trying to do in our life. And I think if people are able to do that a bit more, then hopefully people won't be as stressed. But obviously, that's not how the world works. So yeah, we're just trying to make the best of a bad situation as much as best as we can.
Yeah. And you mentioned there you're at the start football fan too. There's just something about you're both looking that way. You're
Put
not
that in there.
you're not having
Yeah.
to, you're not having to sit down and feel all uncomfortable. There's just something nice about that whole day out and going to the football. And I find that's a good space, particularly for guys who might be a little less, find it difficult to talk about their emotions, for example. I think there's something to be said about context, and putting yourself in an environment that makes that a little easier.
That's a very good point. I mean, even going towards Peter, it's the idea of feeling vulnerable, isn't it, as well? I think it's yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think, like I said, I think before we even we were talking earlier on, we talk about going to an event sometimes and meeting people who are incredibly talented, but sometimes quite difficult to speak with. And I think it's for me going to a place where I'm, maybe don't know anyone, and when I leave, I feel like I know quite a few people because I've had nice chats. And I think it's the idea of just being not being afraid to be vulnerable around people sometimes. That's not to say obviously I go there when I'm super confident, but I think it's more. I always think of people what they were like in school, and that sounds really silly or childish to say, but I always go back to, it feels like sometimes being in a school playground and that feeling of thinking, oh, everyone's looking at me, or everyone's thinking about thinking. It's like actually no one really does. Sometimes I saw a really interesting meme the other day about the idea of when you're 18 or 19, you care about what everyone thinks. When you're 40, you don't care what people think, and then when you're like older, something like you want people to know what you think, but you just can't bother, something like that. But it was the idea of just it changes throughout life how you perceive people, and And I think, yeah, obviously, I mean, I'm my mid 30s now, and I think there's that sort of maybe sweet spot where you're old enough to, I like to think, know a bit better, but also comfortable enough in your own body, that you can, well, you know what, if I go to an event, not know anyone, it's not the end of the world, is it, if I leave and not know anyone again? It's nice if I speak to at least two people, of course, but I'm not going to lose sleep over it when I get home. But yeah, it's a bonus if you do. So I think, yeah, but the 18-year-old me would probably go home and have a little cry to myself. But yeah, that's just the way it is as you grow up, isn't it?
Speaking of school, have you had the chance to take this project into schools, doing talks?
Yeah, we even I think last year actually. So yeah, I work with quite a few charities, and I work with a platform called Blueprint for All, which they work with a lot of schools, mainly secondary schools and sixth forms. So I go, I work with them, and I give talks at schools. And with Still Breathing, it's a tricky one because the content obviously is difficult and it's hard hitting, and for certain obviously ages as well. And because of the content, and obviously there's a lot of strong language in the book as well. There's this, when you first read the book, there is a disclaimer about the strong language. So it wouldn't be adult of me or to go into a school and then start sharing Still Breathing with some certain words. I'll be getting some calls from parents, I imagine. But there's certain, I mean, I've worked on other books which still, heavily focus on the Black community, and I've brought those along to say younger students. I'm talking as young as like 12, 11 and 12. And then, for example, I'm going to a school in the next 2 weeks with Blueprint for All, and then also a sixth form, no, University of Chester, which I'm speaking at in March. And that's where I'm able to, because obviously a bit older individual, I'm able to bring the book and share them and discuss it. But yeah, for me, being able to show a book like Still Breathing, other books I've worked on which touches on race, and more so to young students and young children, I think that's the sweet spot, because actually, if you're able to, I'll use the word target, but if you're able to focus really and share a book of this cause to young people, hopefully it puts in their mindset certain ways of how they should maybe move forward, and not necessarily think, but they are able to think about how they should be, more conscious of other people in a community and more space. And that's not even just regardless of color. That's just as a human being, being respectful for other people. So that's what I always try to do when I bring the book. It's not preaching just for the fact that, if you are Black creative, you can't learn from reading a book like this, because that's not it. It's taught. Everyone can learn from it, regardless of the color. And I really try and put that forward, because that's the only way you can get better in life, if you respectful and you keep on moving forward.
Mm-hmm. But without doubt, you will be a role model for younger people, because it's hard to understate. I even think back to myself at university, and people coming in who were doing what I dreamed of doing in the industry.
Yeah.
But given the nature of the project too, for kids who might feel like like they're going to encounter barriers or any kind of negative reception, to see you out there doing incredible work like this that's role model tackle. So I think that's really important, actually. To give back in any way, shape or form is vital. But don't underestimate the power of what you're doing, is what I'm trying to say.
No, I appreciate it. I'll be honest with you, there is something weird about getting into school again and then being called sir. I remember when I went to a school recently. I think it was the one in Crystal Palace. I went just before Christmas, and then I like the kids are very different depending on the situation, and they were at the very early stage of the class. They were quite loud and noisy, but by the end of that talk, they were really engaged. Which, for me, that was the sweet spot. And I always remember, whenever I go to a class and I'm giving a talk, there's always going to be those troublemakers in the back or whatever, right? Because I used to be, I'm not going to pretend like I was a troublemaker at school. I think I was a good kid in school. But I think I had friends who were troublemakers because of the football team, and that's a whole thing in itself. But whenever I give a talk, if I can see there are maybe 4 or 5 kids at the back a bit more, I try and, rather than single them out and just talk to everyone at the front because they're the ones that listen the most, I try to get them more engaged, because I realized something that, and I don't think it's any top secret, I think most teachers or any adults who work with kids know this, but once you start to speak to them on a level, and more so the ones that are maybe a bit distracted or talk amongst themselves, the rest will kind of follow in that regards. And actually, they were quite engaged with the kids that were talking quite loudly at the back when I gave that sport. The difference is, I think when I first came in, they just didn't think what I would say would be relevant to them. Mm-hmm. So that was where I started to realize, actually, well, hopefully it was enough for them to then at the end have questions to ask at the end, which I think was great, because for me, that is, if I go to a class and speak to 30 kids, if at least 4 kids at the end have questions and get something from it, that's job done. You know, you can't expect to leave a class of 30 kids and everyone understands, you know. But if they can, then amazing. But if not, then at least one or two really understand what I'm trying to get across. And hopefully that can only help for them to go off and make their own space and, you know, the new wave of industry for creatives to come through, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, absolutely. I'm due to do a talk at a school in Bristol, and I've never really done one at sort of high school level. I could be.
Good luck, mate. Yeah. Sunday best.
Well, if I get called sir, that's a victory. I say it's better than ginger bollocks. I'll tell you that much.
Just remember, mate. Honestly, the chairs are so small. Like everything is tiny. Like it's weird. Like we're like a BFG. You walk in, you're like, I don't remember it being this small. Have I just grown really big, or is everything really small? But yeah, it's a weird experience going back. But it's cool as well because you're like, oh, okay. You feel like, how can I say it? You feel like there's a point when you're like, okay, being able to come back and to speak where, you know, I'm 31, but not that I feel like a child, but I know I definitely have child mentalities in certain regards. But when I go to a school, automatically I feel like I'm a little bit more mature than I need to be, probably because I have to be because I'm being professional. But yeah, there we go. Now that I've said I'm live on the recording, there goes my professionalism out the window.
No, yeah, I do have to watch myself because I find it too funny. I can't be seen to be like, it's like with my kids, I can't be seen to be laughing, you know. It's just like...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, I think we've covered more or less everything I wanted to chat about. It's been wonderful. And yeah, I mean, where can people check out your work?
Yeah, sure. So KieronLewis.com. You can find my website on there, some projects, and then Kieron Anthony L on my Instagram and Twitter. I'm pretty active on there, so I'm sharing, you know, pieces of work. But I also do brain's gone dead now. I also do hosting for Adobe Live. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, but it's basically a platform that allows you to showcase a project you're working on, and you can discuss with your community, you know, your methodology about how you create certain projects. So I do hosting quite regularly for them, and then again, we're always on the lookout for people who are, you know, students or graduates that are keen to maybe showcase their work to the community. So again, if you're active and you're interested in doing it, you can always drop me a DM on Instagram or drop me an email, and then I can share some stuff. And hopefully, you could be on there as well. So yeah, you can catch me on those stuff on social media, and I'm quite active. So yeah.
Superb. Well, it's been a joy to chat, mate, and keep doing the great work that you're doing.
Thank you, buddy. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Big thank you to Kieron Lewis for taking the time to come on the show today. It was a pleasure to talk to him after all this time of almost getting there and, you know, losing touch for a little while. But this isn't the first time it's happened. You know, I think there's a lot of instances where a person has got in touch for whatever reason about the show, and I've really wanted to do it and it hasn't happened, and then you'll find that when it does come around, it's an even better time to do it, and there's more to talk about. And I think it's a big thing, and I've been writing about this quite a lot in the book, The Creative Condition, that's coming up in the draft manuscripts, that these timelines are unique to us and we have to trust in them to a degree, and sometimes things just can't be rushed, whether that's a personal evolution, whether it's the times we reach milestones or don't reach milestones, and then the thing that will come instead of them is just as good. And I think that sort of mindset, that these things do work themselves out and work in positively, there's a lot to be said about that. Anyway, that's enough rambling from me. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. You can check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. Check them out. We are Illustration X on social. Get in touch, drop us a review, give us your comments and your thoughts on the show if it resonated with you, at Ben Talon or at Creative Condition _. I use my own account more often, so if you want a quicker response there, or email hello@bentalon.com. Head to kieronlewis.com now to check out Kieron's wonderful work and find out more on any of the things we talked about today. And that's it from me. Big one's coming up. We're edging towards the 200th episode, which is going to be a milestone, and I'm still torn about what that show's going to look like, but there's some crackers in the bank and there's going to be much more coming up, so it's very exciting, and I hope you guys feel the same. Have a wonderful week. Stay creative. Take care.